Hey Flip,
Hello.
how do you feel about AI?
In what way? What with her being worse than official? Question mark? As an
Yes.
off-field DPS?
Yeah, there you
Shots
go.
fired. Shots fired.
I'm gonna start crying.
Hey everyone, my name's Rift, and of course, as usual, I'm joined with Vixen, the co-partner on Gacha Interact. And today, in today's special video, we have some guests with us. Jay Stern up in my top left, at least for me. We've also got Red Warrior, and Dad, and Flip on YouTube. So very happy to have them on for this interesting discussion. And of course, you already saw the title of the video. We're going to be talking about a long thought about question of will Genshin actually buff characters eventually, because it's just been talked about for a while. We've seen Honkai Star Rail already implementing this, and even Zenless also has implemented this as well with characters like Ellen Joe, and it's been really, really awesome to say the least. I really like it. So the question now that everyone's thinking is Genshin gonna do this too? Are they gonna hop on board? So with that being the topic of the video, let's dive right in. Do those in-game prices have you down? Well, don't worry, Lootbar has your back. Lootbar is the go-to top-up service for many gamers around the world. You can enjoy instant delivery within just minutes of your purchase, if not even seconds, a secure transaction which is 100% safe, and part of that is because they don't require emails or passwords. All they need for, let's just say, Genshin Impact is your UID. And they don't just cover Genshin Impact, but many other games, as you can see here on my screen. You can do Honkai Star Rail, Zenless Zone Zero, Wuthering Waves, and just many other games. And the best part of all this is that new users get 10% off their first purchase. Click the link down in the description or pinned comment to start saving today. Now, let's get back to the content. So one of the first major questions surrounding this topic is, should Genshin even buff the characters? Should they not do it? But I guess, Vixen, starting with you, do you think Genshin should do this? I mean, the other games have done it, Honkai, Zenless, like I mentioned. What do you think?
I think it's an interesting question because it's been something, like you said, that some of the other games have talked about and looked at to do as well. We've seen it with a lot of other games, how they've kind of brought back either old mechanics, old ideas to try to bring back old characters. But obviously with Genshin kind of being the forerunner, they haven't had a need to do anything new. Usually they just kind of have been in the front, so it's been almost no need to do so. To do it, I don't know if they, whether or not we'll jump into other questions later about, will they, would they, all those other questions. But the question of should they, I don't know. I think that it would be a good idea just to get either some good help from some older characters and old things. But I don't know if it's also a good idea on another hand, because you have an issue that can come up with maybe some ideas with future characters not being a need to be really pulled anymore. If you buff a character, let's say just pulling out a character like Raiden, if you had buffed her originally, does that mean that a character like Varessa now coming out becomes practically useless? There's just certain things in certain teams especially that I think could be messed with if you do it. So it's kind of a 50-50 in my brain on whether or not they should. I lean just because I want more characters to be buffed, especially with a lot more of the end game coming out, some new things dropping, as well as with the Abyss, sometimes being here and there a little bit more difficult. Having some of the old units just be a little bit stronger could be helpful for more people to clear more end game, maybe more consistently. But I mean, without my own 2 cents on it, what is kind of everybody else's thought? I guess we could jump over to Jay Stern in the top left corner. Kind of your thoughts.
So, I actually have to disagree a little bit. Genshin has a pretty long history of buffing characters. They don't do it in the X character has a fundamental damage increase as much as they release new mechanics, new teammates, new gearing that do significantly buff characters. If
Yeah,
we
kinda
want to
like
go all the way back to 2.0, they introduced Shimenawa's Reminiscence and Emblem of Severed Fate. These are sets that significantly buffed characters like Xingqiu, Shanling, Hu Tao. These were great sets that buffed existing characters. 2.0 or 2.1 also introduced the Catch, which again was a buff for existing polearm characters that use energy recharge. So they had a 4-star weapon option besides Favlance. It's effectively what you would be using otherwise. In Fontaine, we saw Chevreuse, who directly buffed Overload. This last year, we also saw direct increases to Overload and Electro charged in their transformative damage multipliers. Shatter and Superconduct as well, and Swirl all the way back in 1.6. So it's not like they haven't buffed characters. We
It's
even
more
just
like-
saw Escoffier, who made Cryo an element again.
I mean, you're not wrong.
You're
Thank you, Escoffier.
As team slots become more and more limited, as best in slot teams start to become completely cemented in stone, that's where you start running out of places to improve characters, and that's when characters need numerical buffs. Technically, the other thing about that is, since the end of Sumeru, they have essentially done a roster reboot every year where all of your DPSs get swapped out for new ones that are just strictly better, if you know what I mean. And from that extent, if they want the older characters to be competitive, they do need the numerical increases.
So I guess
You can
the
jump in at any
I
time.
about to say, I think the biggest
Yeah.
thing would then be, you know, should they act? So I'm guessing, I guess what we're getting at is they probably shouldn't. So I guess they've in the past done like you've been talking about. They've, I mean, introducing, and I know this means practically nothing for this specific character because it did not do well. But characters like Mika, who helped Eula in that instance, and being that type of character, a character like Yansan, who kind of even helped with maybe the idea of bringing another character outside of a character like Bennett to be an attack buffer, like an actual good attack buffer for more consistent help. You also have another character like mainly like you were talking about with Chevron, who brought in Overload. The only other character that actually had a direct change, and I once again correct me if I'm wrong, would have been Zhongli when he initially released, and they switched around his kit. Now, because he's an Archon and everything, you know, that probably has its own reasons. I guess the question should be, should that happen again? And if, you know, what would that, you know, should they do that?
The Zhongli situation is primarily driven by nationalism, if you weren't aware. Zhongli is the god of leeway. He's the Chinese god in Genshin Impact. So him being a weak
Right.
character prompted pretty widespread outrage.
That's fair.
It's not necessarily that he's an Archon, it's that he's the Chinese Archon.
Okay, yeah, no, I mean, and that makes sense. So, what do you think? Should they, you know, they quote unquote done it in the past. They've either done it directly, indirectly with other characters by bringing in artifacts or other units that are supportive for them, like new 4-stars. What are you thinking? What's your 2 cents on the topic?
At this point, power creep has gotten to the point where you kind of want to give characters those actual numerical increases on top of the indirect buffs. It's speaking of Zhongli. So, are you familiar with what they did exactly?
Well, I know they changed his weapon, though the weapon, I'm not sure if the weapon changed, but I believe that at least his actual kit had a different change. But I mean, yeah, please go in more into
I
depth
want
on
to
that.
give someone else a chance to talk. Does anyone remember original Zhongli?
Original, no, but I know he got HP scaling on his normals after his buff,
I was gonna
which
say.
was pretty huge because I used him as my main DPS at the beginning of the game, and that dude destroyed for like overworld stuff. They increased his
I think-
shield by 150, I think, or to 150 absorption.
So,
Yeah.
there were a couple sets
I
of
think-
changes.
Flip, did you still
oh.
want to say something? Sorry, I thought I heard him.
Sorry, Flip.
I mean, I think I remember a decent amount of what they changed.
All right, go
just-
for it.
All right, you'll see how correct I am. For starters, when he did his hold skill, he didn't summon the pillar. His pillar was only summoned by the tap skill, and the whole skill only did the shield. So you kind of had to choose one or another, which was very weird.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I'll get back to it if I'm incorrect. But there was also like no interruption resistance on his hold skill either, so it was very easy to like get staggered out of it.
Just like Baiju is
Um,
currently.
Yes. Then Geo shields in general were only, I think they were like other shields to where they were 250% to their element, so like he didn't have the universal 150% damage absorption, so his shield was also like quite weak unless it was against geo attacks. And I think there was something to do with his energy, but I don't remember.
The energy is because of the pillar.
Oh yeah. But that's all I remember off the top of my head.
Didn't
There was
they
like some other
add
minor things.
Did they give the?
the red
Sorry,
shred?
did they? Yeah, I was about to. Was
I'm
that
pretty sure
added?
that-
I don't
Oh yeah,
remember.
that's
Oh,
too.
they added
Yep.
the 20% red shred. They reworked Geo Resonance to include
yeah.
20% Geo Resistance shred. They reworked all Geo shields. Instead of being 250% to Geo, 150% to all efficiency, they changed Zhongli's Ascension passive. Before, the HP scaling was only on his Elemental Burst. They made it apply to his Elemental Skill and to his normal attacks. And I think they also slightly increased it. I think it's 33 now, and it was 30 for the burst. Not sure about that one. You mentioned the pillar versus the hold. Yes, that's correct. He didn't have interruption resistance, and he didn't place the pillar when he summoned the shield. But the interesting thing is, two of those major changes were universal systems that technically buffed other characters like Noelle. The change to Geo Resonance was great for Geo teams. It gave them a resonance. They did something similar in 3.0. If you don't know, until 3.0, Hydro Resonance was 15% healing
Oh my gosh.
efficiency.
We all hated that.
I remember that.
Yeah, in 3.0, they buffed it to be 25% HP. This was for Yelan and Hu Tao, and similar teams in the future.
And
that was a really necessary change to make that resonance great.
Wow, Resonance is coming up, I believe.
Yeah, I hope.
Animo Resonance change one.
We can only hope.
Maybe.
So, I mean, there have been a lot of changes, I guess, at the end of the day in terms of outside effects, right? So, I guess going back to that original question, should they buff? Because at this point, we've already kind of now gone to the point of they kind of have, and indirectly in different ways, obviously with Zhongli and the different cases he's done. Obviously, resonances have changed outside numerical, everything else has changed numerical values with things like overload and electro charge. So, going back to that question, Red, kind of, what do you think? What's your actual thoughts on this?
I think characters like Miss Coffee or a Bandaid, I don't like it sometimes when they just are, now the whole entire game is buffed. Because if you buff a Pyro character like Hu Tao, the character that was behind her a little bit, Yoimiya, by a lot at that point, HP buff and stuff. But she's been left in the dust since 3.0. She hasn't gotten anything. This character is very sad to look at. She just sat there and she's not doing nothing. Like, I don't want to use that character. She's weak. Like, I loved her when she came out because she was strong. Power creep happened. Not strong no more. Never used again. I think direct buff needs to happen.
Okay, so yeah, it kind of brings the idea of like some of those old units, especially with Pyro DPSs. I mean, now with Maoika, Arlecchino, and Hu Tao, there's zero reason. I mean, I was also one to grab Yoimiya when she came around, and it's the same thing for me. I mean, she's collected so much dust on my account, it's disgusting. So certain obviously things on that front. So at least that's how we see that idea. Obviously you have other elements that could obviously be talked about the same way. Characters who, even upon release, almost felt a little bit not as strong. Characters like Ayato and stuff like that were really good, or maybe they had like a really cool idea with a niche and very maybe quickly fell off, or other units came out that almost instantaneously just got in the way, or maybe they were never there in the first place. So yeah, okay, some interesting thoughts on maybe how it's just been, constant band-aids with new characters to just fix things for like a very little bit of time. Okay. I mean, yeah, do you have something, Jason?
Hey, Flip.
Hello.
How do you feel about Yai?
In what way? What, with her being worse than official? Question mark?
Yeah.
As an off-field DPS?
Yeah, there you go.
Shots fired. Shots fired.
I'm gonna start crying.
Oh no! Oh, did I hurt someone's feelings?
Dude, I think the Yai has been a hurtful one for a while. So yeah. What are your thoughts on that then?
Well, the topic in general, or just how to fix Yai?
I mean everything. So yeah, just what are your thoughts in general on everything?
Yeah, because with me, I've always been a big proponent of, I don't think Genshin necessarily, like, I think most characters in Genshin, like 98% of them are fine. It's just very certain characters that are very, very bad, in which case you have characters like Albedo and arguably Eula that I do think need balance patches. But, like, kind of like how Jason has said, and you guys have all said as well, characters like Escoffier are kind of like the balance patch for most characters, in which these characters are so strong that they basically are the buffs to the characters, and it kind of saves Genshin from having to actually directly buff them. So it's like
Ayaka doesn't need a buff now because of Escoffier.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's like, are they gonna go back and buff Ayaka too on top of giving Escoffier? Or do they like balance it to make Escoffier weaker and then give Ayaka a buff? It's kind of like, that kind of weird thing.
The smart thing
It's just like,
about doing like the universal increases like Escofia is it
Yep.
benefits every cryo character, not just the one being buffed. You brought up Yoimiya and then brought up the comparison between Hu Tao, Arlecchino, and Makuika. Does it make much sense for specifically Yoimiya to get her damage doubled and leave everyone else the way they are?
Kind of, because she is that. I feel like I haven't used her in a long time, but she does feel that far behind. You
Okay,
know,
you're technically
like
correct, but
like
okay, triple.
I was about to say, I was like,
it. I don't
Dang
want
it, he gave the
Yoimiya
right
to
answer.
I don't want Yoimiya to get buffed and be like 10 times better than Mavwika or even better than Mavwika at all. I think Mavwika needs to be the best power DPS right now.
breach.
But even if she's just good and usable, I'll enjoy that. I'll enjoy using my character I summoned for 3 years ago or something like that.
Yeah, like become viable.
Yeah, like something like that. Just
I'm gonna
let me have
specifically
fun.
give a hot take. I think Mahuika is not
Love
a
hot take,
balanced
yeah.
character. The obvious comparison is to look at Arlecchino. Arlecchino has the
35%.
single biggest. It's more than that. It's 35% when you look at rotation time.
Yeah.
Anyway, Arlecchino has the single biggest downside a character can possibly have in Genshin Impact. She cannot be healed, period, in combat. Mahuika has no limitation and does 50% more damage.
Yeah, that's yeah.
I actually think it's a hot take because I mean, maybe it still is, but I do agree with that. And I know some other bigger creators as well also have said that. I know Jello said that in the past, where Mahuika is kind of a problem character in a sense, like she's just too much, very unbalanced. Because maybe this is something this powerful, it's too early to have something this powerful. Like this is a 7 point whatever character, maybe in terms of like power creep. Because even in teams where she's not the DPS. Every
Right, I
other
was gonna talk
DPS
about off-field.
once.
What
Right,
becomes
just
that
we
problem?
sit Lolly. There you go. You're good. Like,
Right, like what becomes the issue now with her as an off-field character being strong as well, never mind being just a quick swap DPS, considering a lot of the times, even with those DPS she's paired with, you're just popping your burst and then immediately, which is already a big damage number, and then immediately switching to that other DPS.
Yeah, I think the main reason why like Jason says it's controversial, even though I don't think it's controversial, is there's still this community sentiment that Malwika is very limited. She needs Natlan characters, she needs Shilonen, she needs Lolly, which really isn't true. And I still think people like really undervalue his support capabilities.
I think people
but
overrate
yeah.
the fuck out of Arlecchino. Is what it really is.
that is also true.
Oh
Flip-
my
flip-
god.
I think they
flip-
have since the
flip-
Yes,
flip-
beginning.
flip-
I
flip-
the
flip-
number one Arlecchino's. Wait, Jason, you saw the meme, right?
What? Your Clarand
Oh my
meme?
god. Yeah.
Okay. The one you got roasted for on Twitter? Wait, is this the Wonder
Yes,
Woman you
that-
got roasted
that
for on
one.
Twitter?
Yes, potential woman. Yes, it was so good.
Okay.
God.
But it is simply just that Arlecchino has the biggest downside for a character. It makes no sense for her to be immediately replaced
yeah,
by
as
a
balanced
slightly
as
better
she is,
character
too.
who can also be a
But-
support in other teams with no
It also has
downside.
infinite interruption resistance.
Yeah.
I feel like
Yeah,
it's not that bad of a downside. You're kind of gassing up the no healing. I've been using this character. Like,
Really?
all right,
I
I've
have
been
an
using this
account
character
I would
for
like
a
you to play
long
on.
time. A long time. I understand this character can't be healed. I won't get hit. This is literally my YouTube profile picture. That, you know, but I accept like she's a lot worse than Mavwika. But I feel like the no healing is not that big of a deal. I don't know if I would
Constellation
call
do you
it
have?
worse. She's C2 right now. But
Yeah, I
I've
don't care
used
what
her
you
most of-
Did you
most
know
of
she
the
gets
time she was
extra
C1.
damage reduction at C2?
Yes, I did.
There's a lot of
I only got C2 after Mavwika. Like I haven't honestly, and I hate it. I hate it because
I
it
have an
messed with the
account
melts.
with
I hate
White
it.
Tassel Arlecchino. I would like you to try to play on.
No, I'm
And
good.
tell me if you think not being able to be healed is a problem.
I'm good.
I think
I
that's-
look at characters with like C1 and stuff. I like it with a little bit more investment.
The more damage you do, the less problematic
yeah.
it is. The
Right.
less damage you do, the more problematic it is.
yeah, and I
but
think
I feel like
that's
it-
just
it-
how the nature of those passives. They
yeah.
want. It's supposed to be a risk reward character. There's supposed to be a big payoff for getting damage out of them.
Yeah, I think especially with Arlecchino, because I mean, to your own merit as well, Red, I am a huge Arlecchino fan. I love Arlecchino. that being said, you know, I would have to agree. I mean, I did testing with her when I did get her C2, but I waited to do a lot of testing with some other characters. I already had some things on my account, so I did a lot of play testing. I did this actually with Malwika as well. I was in a call with Rift and Jill at the same time. Like, there was times where I've been testing, and I do this every single time I get a character. Even if I get Constellations, I wait to grab the Constellation and actually unlock it until I've done a little bit of testing with some of the other teams. I would have to agree. I think that still without those constellations, because there's a few things in her constellations that make her better. The interruption, because she, with that extra huge damage that she does in the C2 as well, clears things a lot faster as well. There's obviously the downtime of having to worry about the skill with the 5 seconds of the Mask of the Red Death. There's a few things in her kit that make her not, you just, the more damage you do, like you know, Jaystern said. At the same time, I think it could be a quote unquote skill issue, but I think also having R1, having then extra constellations does kind of put it outside of a premise of maybe some other characters, other players that have or don't have, you know, a perfect build or whatever. So
Yeah, people talk about that a lot with me. Was like, why do you do that? And I'm like, I like to have fun. But no, I understand the whole, like, yeah, I wasn't thinking about the, you know, maybe you're using lower damages, so you have to survive for longer.
Yeah. That is why it's problematic when there's a strictly better character releasing in a handful of updates.
Yeah,
But
I was mad about
on the other point of, there's actually kind of a way to fix it. And it also buffs Yoimiya and some of the other characters.
Attack speed?
I was gonna say
No.
normal attack, but it'd be the
There's only
only way.
one Hydro Natlan
Right.
character.
Hey, here's Dahlia. You owe me a buff, right?
Have you considered when all characters in the party are Hydro and Pyro?
Oh my god.
Oh no.
That also would be a pain.
Oh.
It immediately restricts Mahika's teams and effectively nullifies them.
But at the
I
same time,
wonder if
therefore, would
is
that help
happening soon.
Arlecchino?
Cough, cough.
Could that help other characters in the background, right? Like a character like Arlecchino and like the units. Now, once again, the other way to help, and once again I put big quotations on Arlecchino, is if we possibly get a Hydro Shielder or a Pyro Shielder. It's almost like maybe something you get from Layla, but maybe more application, where you have a Shielder, which nullifies the idea of not having to heal yourself. So it'd have to be a strong enough shield, which, yeah, that would be the number one problem. And number two would be application. Because of how fast Arlecchino can hit, that also becomes another problem to worry about as well.
What about Sit Lolly?
Right,
Or
we're
were you
talking
only
about the
talking
double
about
pyro,
bait?
double hydro type thing, yeah.
Okay, yeah, my bad.
Triple Pyro, single Hydro.
Yeah.
Which is
Because of
probably what you would do for
mono
Arlecchino.
Just for the overwhelming amount of application.
No, you would want the attack buff from Bennett.
Fair.
Who'd be the third pyro? Oh. Wait, who'd be the third pyro?
I guess the other
Good point.
support.
The hypothetical character that
Yeah.
doesn't exist.
Either that pyro
Yeah.
character
I thought
or
they'd be
that...
I thought they'd be a Hydra character.
No, make him a Pyro character. It's more interesting.
Why not?
You actually have to
Sure,
think
more
about team
pyro
building.
love. More pyro love. That is
Why
something,
would
you
you want
know.
them to be Hydro?
You have a lot of characters that are all about really good application and the hydro element, so I guess that would also be something to keep in mind. You have characters like Yelan, Xingqiu. Not to say Pyro doesn't, but I think hydro is a little bit, can sometimes have a little bit better, obviously with Farina and everything like that as well. Application is definitely the hydro element, so I guess
Yeah. So yeah, just to, because I think we kind of toned in a bit on Malwika and Arlecchino in a bit. I mean, it is a good example of like direct power creep, and potentially like one of the reasons why a character may need to get buffed. Just to kind of add my own thoughts about this whole general topic is that I don't think Hoyo will buff, just because, like other people have said, especially Jaystern initially, was that they are accustomed and they really just like indirect buffs. For example, Escafio Cryo, for you could say Natlan supports with 4-piece scroll. They really rely on releasing new characters or new things because they want the consumer to get the new thing, pull the new thing to buff their older characters. And just because that's like the most effective business choice, they're probably just going to stick to that. And Genshin has also been pretty slow compared to the other Hoyo games in terms of quality of life. So if they're going to really catch up to the other, if you were to say catch up to the other Hoyo games in terms of buffing like singular characters. They're probably not going to do that for a while. They definitely could for some of the weaker characters because like just for the Yoimi example, I think you could argue that Zitlali was a buff to Yoimi, and that was like, you know, one of her buffs. But you could definitely argue that there are units that even with a newer unit or a newer artifact set that does buff them, they probably do need more numerical buffs simply because as Hoyo or Genshin releases more and more new characters, the damage level is just going to go up, and they're just going to keep falling behind, even if they do get buffed, because the newer characters will just be better.
They kind of broke. They did a pretty good job with this all the way until Fontaine, and then
Yes.
they just kind of smashed it.
I would
Part
argue
of
it was
that,
all pretty solid in Fontaine.
I think part of that is because the Inazuma characters have all been quite bad.
That's
Yeah.
also valid.
You can also say a lot of the same about Sumeru. Reminder, some of the best characters in Sumeru were Nilu and
I'm
Alhaitham.
about to say Nahida and Alhaitham, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the other thing I was going to bring up was something like, because now I guess we've kind of twisted from that first question of should Genshin buff characters. Now we're really looking at, I mean, if you want to kind of maybe give your 2 cents on that question too, I guess too, but I don't know if we want to switch over into the next question, which was more like, will Genshin buff characters? So I don't know, maybe we could start in a reverse order flip if you want to either still give maybe some 2 cents if you had more to say about the first question of should Genshin buff characters, or if you want to start that next topic of will they actually buff characters, since that's where we're kind of leading.
Yeah, I can kind of give my 2 cents in on both. So regarding if should they buff older characters, it's kind of just like how weak does a character have to be for them to get buffed? Like we were just talking about Arlecchino, right? Like, is Malvika being over 50% better than Arlecchino? Is that grounds for her to be buffed now just because she's weaker? And it kind of like it's kind of this weird line to where what damage assumption or how bad does the character have to be in order to be in the line for getting a buff? Does it have to be like a really awful character like Albedo, or does it have to be like comparison like Varessa to Chlorine, which is only like 15%ish? So yeah,
Sort of.
is the characters just being weaker grounds for a buff? And then in regards to will Genshin do it, I honestly, well, they technically have already done it with Zhongli. I don't think Genshin's really opposed to the idea, but it's like, again, they kind of have shown the pattern for like the past 5 years now to where they'd rather just add a character that is the buff rather than buffing the characters directly. ZZZ and HSR have been, well, they've had much shorter lifespans, in which I think they want to do different approaches with those games. So I don't think Genshin will necessarily.
I think I actually have a counter argument, which is the damage difference is so extreme now that it's necessary.
So, I had a quick question, because they've done this already in a game that I know one of us is a little bit more in depth on, and I know Jaystern, I guess quickly, if you might, with Zenless, they've buffed a recent character, and so would
They
you
buffed the 1.0 character.
right? So
Ellen,
that's my, I guess that to an extent, why do you think they did that, and what do you think the reasoning for it was? And I guess to connect that to Genshin, could the same reasoning be applied, or is it so far away from being a good reason, or whatever, so what's your thought on that?
Ellen got buffed because she was the 1.0 character, but that's not exactly the only reason. The obvious reason is Ellen's very popular, and Ellen was very far behind. If you needed to know, her buff is about 50% that they added to Ellen. That is mostly in loosening her teammate restrictions, though, and having her damage or her benefits apply to more of her damage. So the other angle to that is they buffed Ellen for returning players to have a positive experience with the game in version 2.0, because they wanted players to be able to jump into 2.0 and not feel horrible if they stopped playing in 1.1.
Players like me, because I pulled Ellen 1.0, didn't pull a character after that, came back for Trigger actually, and so when I heard about the Ellen buffs not soon after that, I was pretty excited.
The exact same thing is happening in Honkai Star Rail. It's not a coincidence that the buffs are the same update as the Fate crossover.
Mm-hmm. done on purpose because they know they're drawing a lot of people in, is what you're saying. So do you think
It's not
Nod-Krai
just that they're
is
drawing people
doing a similar
in,
thing?
it's that they want people to enjoy being drawn in.
Okay.
To put it simply, if you were to start up Zenless in 2.0 with pre-buff Ellen, you were better off making a new account.
Gotcha.
Whoa.
Gotcha. Okay. All right.
Essentially.
Okay, J Stern.
Throwing some
I can
heat
agree
out.
with that. I'm sorry. And hey, Ellen's my favorite character. I love Ellen to bits,
Same.
but there's some truth to that. Like, you would be better off value-wise just starting fresh, getting some of those polychromes returned through quests and stuff.
Honestly,
so
the biggest thing about the go ahead, Andez.
No, go ahead. Okay, I was
Okay,
gonna
no,
say, so the question is like, is 6.0 Nod-Krai that time?
Right. That would be the idea. Wouldn't is Nod-Krai enough to bring people back? Is Skirk bringing back, quote unquote, once again, I'm talking quote unquote, with Coffee, Escoffier, really bringing back the idea of cryo? Does that pull enough people back? Is Nod-Krai enough? You know.
I'm gonna say it's Snezhnaya. Snezhnaya is the finale
yeah.
of the Archon quest, Ascent TM, essentially,
yep.
the beginning of the end. That's gonna have a marketing push more than Nod-Krai, which
Yeah,
just be a year of filler.
I play this game every day. I have no idea the lore behind Nod-Krai or whatever its importance is. I've got nothing.
We have been finding out. They haven't really told us much at all.
Something, there's a civil war, it's a powder keg. Not civil war, but it's a powder keg area. There are a bunch of factions trying to take over I don't know, man. I'm not a lore guy.
I don't even think Hoyoverse knows what Cry is either. They kind of just threw it at us.
Yeah, and if
With
it
the
was,
Fatui just like copying the Despicable Me movie 1 plot, they're gonna
I'm
steal the
going
moon.
to steal the moon.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
Also, going back to talking about Ellen, one thing I will say as someone who has pretty much been maining her since the beginning of the game is that the biggest thing for Ellen, for me, honestly, wasn't even the damage increase because I was still clearing with her. The biggest thing for me was just the fact that she feels so much better to play with how much she gets like a free parry on her charge attack. She also gets like free dodges in some of her attacks too, which feel very nice. And it's kind of, even though she's still like a lot weaker than Miyabi, she just feels like a lot better to play, even though her damage isn't, again, it's still not really the highest in the
Her
game.
fun factor got buffed by 50% too.
Yeah, so I don't know how to word this, but even if a character is necessarily not that strong numerically, if they just feel good to play, kind of like how people talk about Neuvillette in a way. Well, Neuvillette still has some of the highest numbers in the game, but you get what I mean. Even if the character isn't necessarily the strongest, if they just feel good to play and are easy to use, people will still gravitate towards them. So,
Right. Like,
a
and
character
that's,
like Yoimiya just kind of feels bad to play.
I mean, that's the other thing with, I know a lot of people had issues
I just
with.
want to
Yeah.
add, but I guess a potential counter argument is a character may not feel good to play if they don't do enough damage. To clear
Okay,
and
fair
kill
enough.
content.
They could get
People
away
looking
from
for it,
some
yeah,
pulling
yeah.
points. I guess
another reason not to
the
play.
question then becomes, like, same thing with, Arlecchino to an extent. I know a lot of people ragged on her playstyle, especially waiting the 5 seconds, having an issue with that. Obviously, the healing being an aspect. It felt like they had, Genshin was supposed to be maybe a little bit more low-key for a lot of the casual players, so a lot of people felt like it was forcing them to be maybe making her kit a little bit more difficult to, I guess, grasp fully and grab everything. Never mind Natlan, they've just been giving us essays to read
This is
for
a
the entire.
long-standing Hoyo issue. Have you ever read Sino's C6?
I think
No.
I'd rather not.
One time.
I think once or
hold on,
twice.
let me-
But I
So-
think, what about Natlan characters? I mean, now we have to read essays to understand characters. I
I
mean,
mean, how's the
I got out of
person
college
supposed to pick
already.
up first and know how to use her? How?
right.
Like, she's such a weird character to use.
Can you tell me
I
what this
didn't even
does?
understand it.
I don't know. Hold up. Let's let me actually pull this up before I just.
I can read it out loud if you need.
Yeah. Go ahead. I'm gonna pull it up on my. End.
After using Sacred Right Wolf Swiftness or triggering the Judication effect of the passive talent Featherfall Judgment, Sino will gain 4 stacks of Day of the Jackal effect. When he hits enemies with normal attacks, he will consume 1 stack of Day of the Jackal to fire off one Duststalker bolt. Day of the Jackal lasts for 8 seconds, max 8 stacks. It will be cancelled once Pack Sworn Path Clearer ends. A maximum of one Duststalker bolt can be unleashed this way every 0.4 seconds. You must first unlock the passive talent Featherfall Judgment.
I actually do understand what this does, which is hilarious.
Yeah, I think it's
Yeah, the only okay, yeah, it's just his 250% of his Elements Mastery, right?
well, that's the authority over the 9 bows thing.
I don't
We're
know.
talking
I'm
about
just looking for something that-
No, you're good. The
that says
Featherfall
what
The point
Judgment-
I'm trying to
Duststalker-
make
The
is
fe-
they
Duststalker
use so
bolt
many
does.
made-up words that it's not exactly legible.
Yeah, and I think if
I
they
don't
just
really
said, I think that's the thing, because you always have to look at a previous part of the kit to understand what that part of the kit's talking about, which is why when we go through
Yeah.
readings of what we're reading, usually with whether that's a character or whatever, we'll swap out those words for their burst, their skill, or something like that, because it's a lot easier to read. So I totally agree. This one, it's just
Yeah,
kind of
That's
like, it almost makes it purposefully more difficult to understand for legitimately no reason.
Yeah.
That might be why they started like adding specific numbers into the C6. Like if you look at Skirk, she has a whole separate stack. You can see it right there. That might be why.
They actually added a glossary this update.
Yeah,
Yeah, they
it,
did.
it doesn't help. It doesn't.
Like,
You
on
can
the
mouse
like,
over
terms.
those specific terms and it will tell you what they
Yeah.
are now.
Also, Skirk's constellations are so based. I'm pretty sure her like C2 or C4 is just like 70% attack, and the other one is 40% attack. Thank God they're going back to like them being a bit more simpler.
Skirk has like a lot of effects on her constellation. So this actually is a great transition to something I wanted to bring up on a personal note. Constellations are not the same as they were.
No.
no.
No, I think that's
remember
very
you brought
agreeable.
up you brought this up on stream a lot. I've heard you rant about this. I'm ready.
So
Hmm.
I'm actually gonna go for the extreme example. Have you seen Shaska?
Yeah.
Shaska's a
Yes.
over 300% constellation increase from C0 to C6. I believe it's currently the highest in the game. So
Xiao.
yeah, Xiao has a 0%. No, sorry, he gets 9 damage bonus. Xiao has a
Man, you guys are all shredding my
3%
characters
increase
to
over all of
bits
his
today.
constellations.
We've taken out Yoimiya, Yai Miko, we've taken out Xiao, we've taken out Raiden, we've taken out, I mean, the only one we haven't knocked off the podium yet is Malika, but that's completely besides the point. I mean, I totally agree. Yeah, this is, Xiao, all he does is he just plunges back down and just for more dashes on his skill.
Well, one of the reasons that constellations are better now is normal attack +3 didn't exist until Fontaine. This is immediately a huge divide in character constellations. Even if we ignore that new constellations have 3 effects and double the damage increases, or more than. So, a really simple way to buff old characters would be to change how C3, C5 work to be more like Zenless and Honkai Star Rail, where there increases to
buff
all of
everything.
the talents.
Right.
Yeah.
And that would be the example of the numerical increase without having to directly tamper with the kit multipliers. Just, hey,
I
let's
mean-
just change the constellation value from this talent to that talent, because this is what they actually deal their damage through or something like that.
Yeah.
They would have to increase the level cap. 15 ain't enough.
True. But yeah, the other part of that is literally that constellations do more things now and have larger increases.
I mean, what about,
So, even though a constellation on Wanderer and Xiao cost the same amount of wishes, you're not getting the same increase. That is part of how characters age, and that's just natural power creep. That's also why differences between newer characters and older characters are more pronounced with constellations. I'm gonna go back to Arlecchino. If you had pulled C1, C2 Arlecchino, of course she was gonna be significantly better than other characters. Also see this with Skirk and Varessa, and well, maybe not Varessa, but Mahuika has an incredible C2.
yeah, I mean, what about looking back at a character like Raiden? I mean, does anybody remember what her constellations did after the C2?
Nothing.
I-
They
I
don't do
do.
anything.
How they practically just helped
increases
the other.
Xiaoling's attack percent by 30.
Yeah, but
It's also very useful in
exactly.
Eula
That's
teams.
that's legitimately it. She became a support with more constellations, even though her whole idea was to be that kind of DPS idea. Even though, I mean, she did have some supportive capabilities with helping more energy, but it was very interesting considering the character that was kind of forced about, doing everything herself.
The reverse
Had
idea
Constellations
of what
that-
we see today. Like most supports now, where if you get constellations on them, they turn into a DPS. Whereas Raiden is like, I am a
Yeah,
DPS
that's
in
C6.
nature, and then you get me C6, I'm now your support.
Right.
Okay, that's not actually true. Raiden
Yeah,
C
yeah.
decreases Sara's cooldown from. Okay, the game says 20 seconds. It's actually 21 seconds. The timer starts after the animation. Anyway, she decreases Sara's cooldown to match Raiden's own 18 second. That is a DPS increase on paper and in game.
It's nice.
I'm not gonna pretend like Raiden C6 doesn't do anything because it clearly does.
Yeah.
No,
Full
no,
upgrades or
it's not that
upgrades, I
it
mean.
doesn't, but once again, it was more or less, I wasn't saying it did nothing, but it's once again going along the point that you were talking about with older units having constellations that just don't show up to par to what maybe our newer units bring with constellations.
Then
I mean-
TC1,
Yeah, but
anybody?
yeah, just the thing to I don't know to add is that like if we consider they buffed older constellations, then we have to talk about is this even relevant? Because or do we want to buff constellations that people might not even have, and then we talk about because the reason I bring this up is that sure, for example, I have C2 Raiden. Maybe they buff C2 C1 to do more damage. Is that relevant for most of the player base that wants their favorite character to be buffed? Because some of them
Yeah.
may just have C0.
It's
the
more
thing I
of
wanna-
a reason
yeah.
to pull copies on that favorite character
Yes, that is true.
instead
Plus,
of literally
enough-
abandoning them entirely.
Bring an older
It is
character.
breathing life into them in a sense.
would you say that's like better, like
It's better for
a
them
better way of
financially.
a better way of buffing their characters? Because I know, like for example, even let's just say you have an Ayaka main, and they don't like Escoffier, they're not pulling Escoffier even if Escoffier is a huge buff to them. Because I know I know there are people who are very like they're very stubborn and won't pull a new character that will buff them. Buff their
I
main
actually
or
want to
something.
talk about Ayaka and Skirk for a moment. Do you know
Okay.
what Ayaka's cons do?
30% defense shred on
Or
C2, maybe?
C1's
Her
I
C1
know,
is
yeah.
the only constellation in the game that does literally.
well, there's I'll have them C1 to an extent.
That one at least can be used.
Another
You will
one
never
kicks
use
the butt.
Ayaka's.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, because doesn't, I
But
mean, her,
that's not what I was trying to get to. Ayaka's C2 is these side gates that theoretically are a really large increase. The problem is they don't hit. They just fly past enemies. So when people are doing constellation comparisons between Ayaka and Skirk, in most cases, C2 Ayaka is C0 Ayaka. Ayaka's essential only constellations are C3 and C4. And it's at that point easy to say, yeah, C0 Skirk can compete with C6 Ayaka because Ayaka's constellations don't do anything.
so I guess that
which
would be
is
the,
a really interesting angle.
so I guess that's, so I guess pulling us back to the original questions, right? The first question, I guess, initially was, should Genshin buff characters? And I guess we're kind of a little, it seemed like at least a little bit, going back and forth. There's very good points on both sides. It seems like we're a little divided on that one, which is totally fine. I think that's a good thing because I think the player base is
As
also
most people.
probably a little divided on that as well. So it's a very good thing to have as well. The next thing was, will Genshin buff those old characters? We talked about how, that's already happened a little bit here and there with either new characters, old characters, new characters being introduced to buff old characters. We talked about Escoffier, all these other units and stuff like that have changed. If you were going to change, would you do constellations and stuff like that? So I guess if they were to do this, for the people that maybe were like, actually, maybe here or there, I could see where they could choose things, whether it's through a constellation, whether it's through buffing multipliers, whether it's through whatever. I guess the next question would be, if they were to do this, if they were to get this done, if you were in front of John Hoyo, what would you say? And if they were listening to you, if you had their ear, which characters would you say, these are the units that need to get buffed?
Venti. He's an Archon and he's actually useless. Nothing.
He's
about
good for
him.
theater.
Is he?
Man, it
Are
just
you
like
sure?
whenever I
He's
use him, I get
theater.
him paired with Wu and it sucks. No, like when you're
Okay.
paired with a random teammate that might not even be able to make use of your burst, no, he's not good for theater.
Fair enough.
It's more like having
He's a
another
nice little
option
placeholder.
when it comes to theater. Like, okay, I want to make sure, like, okay, I have Shilonen, I have Kazuha, but when it comes to theater, you want multiple characters. Maybe sometimes the element isn't available. Just having more options. I think theater is just different, like with horizontal investment. So having more characters will be good, even if they're mid characters, just mid. Just having them there, even as a filler in the team, can still be helpful. Like in Venti's case, he's still a viridescent shredder. He can still do that. And all Animo characters have that, especially the off-fielder ones. They can have that value. And yes, I actually do agree that Venti would be one of the candidates to receive a buff. So I'd agree on that front. But yeah, I think that he obviously still has
So,
uses, but is
There
heavily
are
powered.
like, there are two ways to look at which characters should be buffed. Which characters could be the most impactful with a buff, and which characters are the actual worst in the game. And the other way to look at it is which characters are popular enough to get a buff.
That's where I was, if they were gonna buff them, marketing wise, smart wise, Hoyo wise. If you're gonna buff anyone, you look at who are the best, and most likely,
look
especially in the
at-
Chinese server,
Minus
You
Val.
look
Which-
at
who's the
Hu Tao,
best?
Ganyu, Xiao, basically the leeway characters.
right? So especially with the Chinese server,
Cleave.
considering they have the most pull, because for being honest, they usually do. What does it only then go right to those few characters like you talked about? I was gonna bring up Hu Tao, Ganyu, and Xiao. I mean, is that it? Do they kind of have to go that route?
Yeah.
You know,
As
sadly.
easy as it is to say Albedo and Venti are some of the worst characters in the game, they need buffs. Albedo's not getting a buff, I'm sorry.
I think it.
Albedo
they
got a buff.
rerun
Her
the
name is
guy.
Shiori.
The Shiori, yeah. It's kind of funny how like
And
ever
another
like
one.
post Natlan, you could honestly just give Chiori her C1 and she still wouldn't even be the like insane of like a character in a way.
She still wouldn't be useful. I know.
I feel like they gave Venti and like a lot of reruns. He's clearly like profitable for them. They wouldn't keep rerunning him for no reason.
Well they
It's
are
kinda like a
guaranteed
poster
to like run
child.
an arc on every patch.
Yeah, but they don't have to. It's their game. They can just not rerun Venti, or they could put him in the Chronicle
They
now.
really should have.
Yeah, should have. Yeah,
Sure.
but they didn't. Maybe he makes money. I don't know the back end of it, but
Yeah.
the guy still gets actual banners. So
I would think that all Archons would still have a pull, no? Like
What does that even mean?
they're popular enough.
Oh, then yes.
Yeah.
I would say yeah, because they are kind of what you would call, Riff said this a second ago, kind of the poster child of each nation, usually. So I mean, I guess I could see. I mean, I think if you're gonna start somewhere, in my personal opinion, you'd have to start with the Archons that would need it. For instance,
Yeah.
talking about Venti and talking about, in my opinion,
And
I still
Raiden.
think Raiden, to an extent, I think it's to bring her up, maybe
doesn't have to
possibly
be
on par.
huge.
We talked about how big of a gap there is between her and someone like Varessa. So does that mean that what might work well with her? So is there a rework in her constellations? Is there a rework anywhere else? I just think that you got to start with the Archons, in my opinion.
You see, I kind of have a fundamental issue with platforming characters with a title, especially in Genshin.
Hunter!
Yeah. Especially in Genshin, Venti, Zhongli, Raiden, they aren't great characters, and some of them never were.
Zhongli.
Nah,
Yeah,
he
but
does not
Venti-
doing too hot right now. The
Mhm.
Archon status doesn't really mean anything, and really never did.
I mean, when you look at the past 3 Archons, though, they've
And I'd
been
like to keep it
the
that
best.
way.
They've been the
I
best,
think it
and
makes
the
the
game
game more
definitely
interesting.
treats them differently. The game absolutely treats those characters differently. You just talked about they do the Archon rerun every single time. Like the game treats them differently, so we kind of expect them to be treated differently.
I think characters like
Yeah, I
Farina
think,
and Mawika have kind of changed that precedent, whether that's because we're in that time period. If you remember back when, I mean, Raiden was still when she released, Raiden was still a good character. Once again, you had to grab that C2 though, is the thing, but I mean, once again, you still had that idea for being a good and strong character. Obviously, Zhongli's change actually made him useful, especially when paired with someone like Hu Tao, building him kind of in like a just not grabbing his weapon and kind of building him like a tank bot, but also a damage character. Venti back when, whether it was to yeet someone's artifacts off the edge when you were claiming from a tree, or whether or not it was for any other facet, I guess. Those units during those time periods were strong. So does that mean by the time we get to Snezhnaya, or when we get to Nod-Krai, does that mean a character like Farina would fall off? Does that mean a character like Malwika would eventually fall off? Is it because we're in the time period right now, or is it because they've changed their feeling, or maybe not their feeling, but they've changed how characters in general work, maybe not necessarily just the Archons?
So this is a personal nitpick of mine that I'm going to vent out a little bit here. So what we do is we make content for every character in the game. Every character in the game costs the same amount of pulls. You know what really sucks? When you want to pull a DPS, and you know what the sentiment is around that character? They're not the Archon. They're not a Void Hunter. You should skip them. They're not worth your pulls. It makes the game less interesting. It makes creating content less interesting. It makes playing the game update to update less interesting.
Because you're only looking forward towards those Void Hunters, Archons,
Those tentacles.
or those
You're not
one character.
when the game itself is giving you signs that you shouldn't pull anything except what we tell you to pull, it negatively impacts the game.
So going back to Venti, Zhongli, and Raiden, where they weren't necessarily the best pulls at every single turn, that was a good period of time. Whereas now that we have, we probably could throw Nahida in there as well, or at least in the middle. But now going with characters like Farina, where it was must pull. I mean, Risley, Neuvillette, you had so many characters, and even still other units, all you gotta have to do now is throw Marshal Say on them and pair him with Farina and call it a day, and there's no issue anymore. Malwika now, by just being in basically everywhere, everybody's best team is just a form of this character, but throw in Malwika, C2 Malwika, so I guess, yeah, in that sense, it has changed how Genshin has worked.
I feel like they've really honed in on this, like, making certain characters powerful, and I think we can kind of see that all the games are really heading towards Shill Valley. Like, I don't remember in, I don't know, let's just say Sumeru, kind of Fontaine, where the end game content was like very, very strictly favored around a single archetype or character. And it feels like that is the new marketing.
The prevalent boss in all of Fontaine had 70% cryo resistance and 70% animal resistance.
I mean, that is true. Yes, that is true. It just feels like, especially with Stygian Onslaught, that the importance of
play the character we want you to.
Yes, the importance of having a specific team comp is becoming more and more important. Where at least it felt like there were more options. Of course, the options, there are clear better options. There always has been Shill. It just feels like the content with Stygian Onslaught releasing is becoming more and more important, and like the game is pushing everyone to, yes, you should pull the newest character to help you.
Yes, it is also that the Shill is literally getting better. Back during Fontaine, it was a big deal. Neuvillette had a 60 damage bonus Abyss Blessing. We're now getting 75 damage bonus on every Abyss for the on-meta characters.
Yeah, and I was gonna say this, like, floor 12 specifically getting buffs is something that started when Malwika came out. I think it was around 5.3 when Malwika came out. That floor 12 just started getting the actual floor buffs for whatever reason. So it's not even just like you get the Abyss Blessing. Now floor 12 you get like super hyper specific niche buffs that are extremely strong. And then they've also changed like the multiplier to now be like from 2.5 to like consistently 300
HP.
3.75.
Yes.
Yes.
The other thing about that is enemy mechanics are more strict. We literally have bosses or a boss that you can't do damage to unless you bring cryo.
Yeah.
Pretty restricted.
Same thing with this lava snake you need pyro.
Yes, the lava snake
And
that needs
even
pyro with no hydro.
Even Papilla, which there's some people that saying yes, it's like you have to have Natlan characters, and that wasn't necessarily true. But I mean, in a theoretical world where it becomes a boss in Stygian Onslaught and it just happens to have double the shield,
everyone
maybe
should use
Natlan
Chlorand.
character.
Yes, chlorine fish, quick burn chlorine
Fluoride,
fish will destroy
yes.
it.
Seriously though, with the papilla or whatever, like maybe you guys will agree with me on this. I don't know. But I feel like Kanish and Chaska were the heavily pushed for characters to be used against that boss. I mean, Kanish because burning's happening and burning's just taking
Chaska's
that shield off so fast. And then
Strangely,
Chaska,
really bad at dealing with it. Though.
really, because
Hmm?
that's funny you say that because I don't know. I feel like I have the opposite experience. Like
Okay.
when we had
Chaska?
that thing
Yeah,
in
she
5.2 or
did very well.
5.3, Chaska shredded that
Yeah,
that
it
papilla.
was.
Like I
She,
think
Maybe
2
I'm
or
not
3 charge
remembering.
attacks. Anyway, I know Kanish is really good though. I mean, burning
Kanish
in
is
general,
very,
you don't even
very
have
good
to have
at it.
Kanish. You could do just any other pyro DPS or whatever and do burning, and it would just deal with that. And that's like a mechanical example of like, hey, we want you to use this, and it's just getting more and more specific. And we had with this abyss and yet another Mawika check saying, hey, you have 0 energy, you're going to deal more damage. And I think actually Vixen and I talked about this. We thought that was going to be for Skirk because obviously she's the other character that
It's for
doesn't
both
have
And then you look,
simultaneously.
yeah, and
you
then
can use both.
on
they
the
put
other
cryo
side, you have
buffs
to use a
in the first.
right, the second half,
Cryo
like you were
normal
saying, Red,
attacks.
you have to use now that second half, that normal attack cryo damage. So Skirk's forced there, which is a brand new character, but now you're also forced to have Mawika in that first half. Now, once again, not forced, it's heavily
It's just that you'll
I
have a
actually-
significantly easier time.
correct.
Yeah, because I wanted to make
using-
sure to kind of gauge how I still felt about older characters. I was actually still able to do this abyss. I did Hu Tao, Farina, Yelan, Shilona, her best team, of course,
Yep.
on first side, and then I did Ayato with not Farina, Escoffier, Yelan, Sitlali, I think, because Farina
You
was
played
with
2
Hu Tao.
Yelons?
I wish. Yeah, I had Xing Cho in there with the skin, you know.
Oh, okay.
But yeah, so I was like, okay, so
Wait, no,
Ayato
go-
still did it.
Go over those teams one more time, because I think you said Yelan
Okay,
for both
okay.
halves, that's why.
Then it. Okay, yeah, you're right. I see. Sorry. So it was definitely Hu Tao, Farina, Xing Cho, and or Yelan. Either way, it was Farina, Yelan, and Xing Cho were between the two. I can't remember specifically which way that was, but I do remember that I did not use Farina for Ayat. I even did Nilu with Escoffier on a Hydro build, and that actually worked. And I had like a minute 26 to spare, so I was actually really surprised by that. But I guess I say all this to say there are lots of cases where still older units can shine, especially I know this is an Escoffier example. So like that's obviously like I had to have Escoffier to even make that possible because it'd be very borderline without that. And then for Hu Tao, I have the C1 and it was also like very close to her best team with the double Hydro and Shalonen. So it's a good case for those characters. So in their best teams, they did okay. And there was some other things I tried as well, but so like you said, Vixen, it's like not required, it's pushing for Mawika and Skirk, but you can definitely get away. Like Ayaka can definitely do this abyss. Heck, even Ganyu could do this abyss. But the catch is like, did you pull a Scoffier? Do you have Farina use that? You have to have some already other powerful units to help out what Ganyu or Ayaka cannot make up for when compared to Skirk.
One of my friends, I you can see it in the Discord group chat now, but one of my friends got like a very impressive clear with, I think that's purely 1.0 units.
Zhongli and Hu Tao are not in 1.0. Neither is Rosario.
Like 1.x,
1.x.
1.x units. Yes,
Hey.
that's what I meant. You know what I meant.
Well,
Yeah.
I kind of mentioned this earlier. Just because the characters are from 1.x doesn't mean they're the same as they were.
I mean, these are the same
Sets
teams,
like Emblem,
other than-
Shimenawa's
Right, talking
new
about that
weapons.
Chongling thing, yeah.
So it's not exactly as pure of a comparison as you want it to be, but it doesn't exactly matter.
Yeah, because like
they
everyone
got
has
the
access
buffs,
to this.
then
Yeah.
Like if you want to be super technical, there was a bug in the game in 1.6 that made 4-piece Crimson Witch of Flames apply the overload bonus to vaporize if vaporize and overload were triggered simultaneously, which made the best
team
Hu
in the
Tao
game
team, or
overvape?
the best team in the game, official Xingqiu Hu Tao. Like
Good
that
stuff.
is something that can't exist now. Well, technically it does because they buffed overload, but whatever. Characters are not the same, but it doesn't really matter. The point still stands. Like, yeah,
The
you do not
outside buffs.
need the new characters.
Yeah.
I think you would struggle a lot more with Yoimiya than you would Tao. So it might not be
Oh,
the
yeah.
best example.
I would agree with that.
depends. I forget what the first half is, but if it's mostly single target, it's not gonna be that much of a bigger struggle. I don't think.
Well, especially when you have the Spirit
Doing
Seeker.
literally half the damage makes things a lot harder.
Yeah, I was about to say.
See, I've never been able to see that. I use those characters constantly when they were in like the 2.0 series, and I just could not see it
Fair enough.
like that huge of a difference.
Like, are you saying Yoimiya and Hu Tao? Is that
Yeah, between them, I was so confused why people were saying 50%. I was like that. I looked at their timings and it's like Yomi is 3 seconds behind. I don't get it.
Based.
Yeah, I think
It wasn't 50%. It was way more than that.
Yeah, people really tried to talk up Hutao like the gap was big. I
I don't
really
know if she's that much over Yoimiya. I would say she's over Yoimiya, but not by like a crap ton.
Yeah,
But,
maybe
like,
nowadays.
Yoimiya in some of her
50%.
good, like in some best teams, she's pretty, like she can do some crazy stuff. I even had a friend, he would get like upwards of like 100K on those normal fives and stuff pretty regularly. And I was like, okay, all right.
Yeah, but I don't know if that's C0 R0, but yeah, mine easily over like 120s.
I
Back
think it
in
was
the
like
day.
115, but I think it was a C0
Back
then.
in the
in
day.
fact. Okay, I think the catch was he had a C6 Farina, and so like you've got the C1 and C2.
Oh, this is
that would-
modern.
That yeah, maybe that. So that's where it's different, I guess, because this was like a year ago or something, maybe a year and a half.
Yeah, because
the
I
middle of all
remember
the Fontaine stuff,
120s back like in 2.0. Then again, I wasn't obsessed
Okay.
with crit rate back then, so my builds were kind of 70%
Proficient for that
crit
number.
rate.
Yes, there it is.
Yeah, 70% crit rate was where I went.
It's a very interesting topic, at least for right now, that we have a lot of characters like we've talked about. We've constantly brought back a character like Yoimiya, who's had some issues. So I guess we've talked about, I guess, Archons wouldn't be maybe one of those characters if you were to choose characters. It would more or less, I guess what everybody's saying is instead of choosing characters that are based on ranking, instead, would we look at characters that are maybe not as, lore strong and maybe look at characters that are more maybe just far down the ranks? If you're gonna buff, do you buff someone like Eula? Do you make physical useful again? Or do you just do what Genshin does again, like it normally does with everything, and bring in a unit like Mika was maybe supposed to be and make a physical version of Chevreus and actually make it a useful thing again?
I think that things are more complicated with Genshin because the roster is so big.
Yeah.
If you were to roll out buffs, what is the standard of the buffs? And to reach that standard with every character that it's below it, how many characters do you need to buff?
Fair.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like where does it apply, kind of thing? Because if you just buff like, let's say, as something as broad as like this entire element, it's like, okay, well, if you go and buff Pyro, Malwika does not need that. She's already unbalanced as it is. She's way overboard when compared to everything else. She does not need anything. So it's like, it's got to be specific, right?
So then do you just keep doing the Escoffier treatment? Do you just keep bringing back an element that needs help? For instance, probably a, spread and quicken. Do you possibly bring, now once again, I mean, you could argue certain units that could help still right now that are still strong, but do you help Dendro a little bit more? Do you maybe make certain units stronger like that?
Actually want to bring up Xiao here. There is a point where you simply cannot put more characters into a team.
Fair.
Xiao has a fixed 4-slot team. You cannot replace Farazan. You currently cannot replace Xiaonian, and you're stuck with Farina. You could make a more specific plunge buffer than Farina, but it's not going to be that much better.
Right.
Especially if you want to talk about, well, you can always make better constellations, but that's besides the point. Xiao is doing very little himself in this team. More than half of his plunge damage is from Xiaonian.
A lot of the damage in that team is also Farina. So
You've kind of reached a limit where you can't make him better unless you give him more damage.
Right. And
like
what
a
do you
numerical buff, perhaps? Is that what you're alluding to?
But yeah, let's say his plunge does more damage.
Right, like
Yeah.
increasing his modifiers from his burst, for instance, increasing that. Because I mean, you have these other things that have quote unquote helped him. For instance, the brand new plunge set that is barely more useful than Vermilion, and that's.
I think it's kind of significantly better than Vermilion.
You think it's way better? Okay, because from the testing and from the numbers I've seen from other people, because I don't have that set, because I'm just keeping Vermilion. Supposedly people say that it's like barely better, but I don't know.
Here's part of the problem. Xiao is a character they kept eternally on the edge of unplay.
I've used when it was 4.0, that man was fun for me. It was really good.
Fair enough.
Really.
I think we're just at a
in
point where
the
Gaming is gonna feel better, and that's
Well-
crazy to think about because like
Oh,
even
he
nowadays,
kinda already
doesn't C6 Gaming like out DPS Hu Tao even?
up DPS is every character not named Mahuika? Yes.
Yeah, there you go. Because like he's insane. You got the full
But-
team there. Yeah.
What I was trying to say is you aren't likely to notice a difference when you're not doing enough more damage to actually clear faster. You're gated by the amount of rotations you take to kill an
Yeah.
enemy or clear a chamber. Doing 15% more damage may not equate to a 15% faster clear. It's actually pretty unlikely to.
And also like what you said with like the team's just full. I can't like throw in the fifth character because there's so many options at the point. You're kind of then forced to, if you want to make your Xiao better, you have to pull cons, and you would have to look at the C1, C2 Farina, C1, C2 Xianyun.
And you're not even
That's
looking
the
at
only way.
Constellations for Xiao. Believe me, I have the C0R1 of that entire team you've just talked about. Obviously, Farazan is at C6, but I have the C0R1 Farina, Xianyun, and my Xiao is C1R1, don't ask. So that's the idea, is that even still, I mean, you're cracking over 100k, and that's kind of it. It got to a point where I still have lots of fun with him. In terms of Abyss clears, I'm not gonna lie, I just don't use him as much anymore.
But you know what really sucks? Benching a character you pulled to specifically buff a character. The obvious example here is this happened to Shenhe, who is a character people pulled for their Ayakas and their Ganyas. And then when Farina released, you just played Charlotte, and you didn't use Shenhe.
It took until like Shilonen to get a
Mhm.
better Farina healer.
It took it realistically until Escofia. Well,
Yeah, I was gonna
you
no,
can
yeah.
say Shilonen, but Escofia is the big example where Shenhe is now seeing real usage again.
And I think that's good for her. That's kind of one way they were able to bring her back. Maybe not buff Shenhe, but like, hey, let's make it where she's actually kind of more usable now. If the players that do have her. So
It was most likely indirectly. I don't think they were thinking about buffing Shenhe as much. Once again, it's
Yeah,
another character I have.
Reminder: Shenhe is literally on banner.
mhm.
Yeah,
She escaped Chronicled Wish just for this.
and that's
The-
something we also talked about. It's interesting because I was stupid back way back when I pulled, and it wasn't really stupid. I just really liked Eula. I pulled Shenhe for Eula to help out with that because I was like physical resistance. Like I just really liked Eula. But it's nice right now to see Shenhe come back. But I'm gonna be honest with you. As someone who really likes Shenhe and actually enjoys playing her, and I like her play, so I like the hold skill, the tap skill, I like kind of how she works a little bit. I really like her animations and everything, but I am fearful of that moment when she becomes a useless character and they either power creep her or just another better unit that is going to take her place in that team. Because right now, I mean, technically, I know people have talked about Yelan can easily just be in place of her, and definitely so. And then
Scroll TTDS Mualani.
exactly. And I was just about to say, Mualani literally just throwing TTDS on her. Or slapping in a character like Yelan or Shenhe.
Yeah, 'cause-
What happens when you get rid of those, what happens when you get that new character, a Nod-Krai, that is helping that team again and just kicks Shenhe?
What
or
happens when
whatever
you
out?
replace Shenhe with the Lunar Freeze support?
Yeah, oh my! I was gonna
Yes.
say Lunar Freeze. Yes. Currently, Skirk just doesn't really have a concrete force that is
Correct.
massively above other options. Yelan, Sitlali, Shenhe, and Mualani are all about to just as good as each other, realistically. When we get that force slot, it's going to be Lunar Freeze Nod-Krai unit, most likely. And Shenhe most definitely will be getting power grabbed. She's the premier cryo support, and she's already just losing to having scroll TTDS on a character.
supposed to be a DPS and a totally different, like a vaporized. It's
So
totally
maybe
different.
I'm weird in
Literally,
this
yes.
instance. From my own throwing things together, I've seen Shunha at the top, Yelan behind that, and then Sitlali and Mualani kind of in between, kind of those. But I still see Shunha at the
Yeah.
top. Maybe my account's just weird. But at least from what I've done,
You're getting 75 normal attack cryo damage bonus
from
from Abyss.
oh no, I'm not. I wasn't doing this. I was doing Overworld, which
Okay.
is I was talking about. Yeah. No, I don't do that because if I do that, then I
specifically benefits Shenhe more than the other character.
correct. Yes. So that's why I don't. But testing in terms of the other way, which is looking at just Overworld fighting, which because of how just Overworld is right now, it's a little difficult to actually have a long-lasting thing last for a long period of time. But you can still see it in a shorter time frame and at least look back at the footage and see what that looks like. But that's at least what I see on my end.
I don't think the Skirk Fort slot really matters right now. The fact is there are a lot of options. It feels
lot of
really
options is
bad
good.
when you pull a character just to support your favorite DPS, and then that pull becomes invalidated. We
Right.
see this all the time in Honkai Star Rail. Have you ever known a Jingyan man? They pull every
Yes.
single harmony every year.
Yes.
It's also true.
They are constantly cycling new harmony characters because they're all a slight upgrade for Jingyan. And you know what? They never complain.
That's true. I mean, they
Kinda
just love it.
based. It's
They're just like, you know what? I'm
Being
gonna
a
keep
long-term
going.
HSR player is just always pulling the new harmony.
I mean,
It
yeah,
is,
especially
but it's
Tribby coming
specifically
out
funny
for
when
the
you pull
Sunday.
them for one character.
Yeah, but the good thing is that characters like Tribby and characters like Sunday can still be pretty good for some other units. Now, I'm not saying that
I'm actually gonna call out Sunday here.
okay.
He's not.
You
like
don't
I know where you're gonna go with that, too.
think so for like a Glaya or anything like that?
You need to have Uglia.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying though. But if you have a Glaya, then having Sunday.
That's the one character he's good for.
Okay. I mean, well, I know, but that's the other thing is then the question that becomes, what about, like, because a lot of people just use, especially for energy issues, they just go right to Huohua for a lot of that as well.
Yeah.
So then Sunday becomes, like you're saying, comes practically, I don't know, null and
It's
void.
that his buffs are balanced around a character having a summon. Otherwise, he does not buff as much as the other harmonies. Anyway,
I've seen him as really good for
the action
if you're-
advance is always good at least.
Yeah. The energy is going to be nice. Like I know people will use him with even an older character like Argenti, Hyper and Naxa really likes him. And I've noticed it's usually hyper characters. Even if you are pulling out the Zila, dusting that off, usually, at least from what I've seen on charts and stuff, you want to pull out Sunday because
Yeah.
he's strategically going to be better than Sparkle as an option, better than Treeby even because he's hyper buffing that one character. But if you're doing like instead of Hyper Anaxa, if you're doing like the more erudition team with like the Herda, you would actually want to use Treeby over Sunday. So Treeby's buffing both the Herda and Anaxa, and it's not just Sunday buffing only the Herda or only Anaxa.
There is no Tribby. Her name
Alright.
is only E1 Tribby.
Also,
I really
pretty true.
the Sunday Caster's copium was so funny.
The point that I wanted to make is it just feels bad having supports be invalidated. It almost feels worse than having DPSs invalidated. Because the idea behind a support is they're supposed to get mileage.
Right. What also feels like with a
Uh,
DPS, you can always get new supports to kind of maybe bring the team together. Kind of, aka bringing back Xiao. I know that's not necessarily being a perfect
supports
example,
get
but
permanently retired when they're power crept.
exactly. Whereas a DPS at least has a way, usually, to kind of have a really good new support. Throw
All
them
they need
forward.
to do is make a pyro character when all characters in the team are pyro and hydro. Or hydro or
So
whatever.
we're talking about
Do
lunar
more
melt
damage, do more vape.
or lunar vape. Is that what we're talking about?
Massive buff for Mualani, Arlecchino, Hu Tao.
Even like
It's
a
like
modifier.
Mavuika too.
No,
Yeah.
Mahuika doesn't have enough teammates to build around it.
Furina, I guess, yeah. But
You'd have to play TTDS Scroll Mualani.
it's good for Skirk. You don't think they can make it good for Mavuika? Mavuika with highest base attack in the
it
game?
could be good, but the fact is, there's an opportunity cost behind doing that.
There
the
is, but
team
if
slot
it's better,
isn't
it's
as
better.
available as it is for other characters, which is why doing something like that can buff the pyro characters to be competitive with Mahuika without directly buffing them.
Because if
Yeah.
Mawika's also getting an increase, then at that point, if you're buffing the pyro roster, you're really just leaving the rest of the roster, the other 6 elements behind, and that's a
So,
whole other issue, I
We've
guess.
been talking about Nod-Krai. Can we talk about the fact that they buffed Electro twice, or more, actually more than twice?
Okay, so
Yeah,
we have
yeah.
we have Overload, we have Lunar Charge now. What else
And
are you thinking?
Sumeru.
And
No,
what are you talking about? Spread?
Dendro exists to buff Electro.
Right.
Yeah.
With Quicken and Aggravate.
Hyperbloom, Quicken, Aggravate. These reactions all work together, and the thing about Aggravate is fundamentally good game design because it uses your crit and your damage bonus. It ignores your attack and your talent value. The downside of it is it ignores your attack, so attack buffs are less effective, but it uses more stats than Electro Charged and the existing transformatives. Aggravate is very good game design, and I wish they would buff Aggravate spread teams. I really like those reactions,
I do too.
especially because they interact with Hyperbloom and Bloom cores, because the reactions can coexist. It's cool. Anyway,
I can still
And
cope
it's
with
just a
my
cool
Alhaitham.
reaction.
what they've gone out of their way to specifically buff Electro more than once because Pyro
It
is
doesn't
too
have amp
good,
reactions.
and Pyro keeps getting better.
Pyro
Yeah.
keeps getting better. You have Arena, Nevalette, I mean, even technically Mualani being thrown everywhere. Now you have this freeze idea being thrown in as well. Cryo's been left in dust. Okay, so I guess the next thing is where's this kind of... Okay, I think that's another... I was about to
my
ask where
point is
Animo's
they
going, but...
buff things through new reactions,
Right, with
No, I
this...
don't want
right?
to.
Like, changing the existing reactions.
Yeah, I don't wanna
Is
do
that enough of a way to buff a character?
You
I guess
How do
Well,
you
like,
feel
you had something
about
to
a
say, Red.
hypothetical Lunar Charged?
It depends if they do another hyper bloom. If they're not gonna do another hyper bloom, it's gonna be like, oh, you react and it adds to your damage, like aggravate, right? That didn't really hurt the game. Hyper bloom raised the floor so much they made Nevi. All right, that I don't like it. I don't want another one.
Yeah, Hyperbloom it was kind of a point of contention where like Hyperbloom was the new meta. Cookie's now the best character in the game or whatever, right? So like, oh, you want to know Fremenay's best team? Well, actually just throw a Hydro, Dendro, and Cookie, and that's Fremenay's best team. And it's like, okay. You know what I mean? So it's like it's weird. Like,
A
'cause
lot
I
of
mean,
that got
even
really out of
Ziox talked
hand
about
and
like your
started
Hyperbloom.
being a bit of a meme to the point where it
Yeah,
wasn't
yeah.
exactly true.
Yeah.
Ayaka's best team was not being played in Bloom,
Yeah, no, I
but
don't-
people did not like Ayaka or Risley, so they recommended it, just kind of unknowingly. A bit of that was overinflated and like inflammatory viral stuff, but
Mhm.
I think Hyperbloom was good.
Yeah, I do too.
I don't think it was as good as people claim, but it doesn't really matter because
So good.
it was great for the game. They made characters around the reaction.
Yeah, but they also turned Raiden into an off-fielder, so it's
About that Tainari.
I just I can't, man. Like it's not. I don't want Hyper Bloom again. It's fine if they want to do other reactions, just not Hyper Bloom, man.
Like a new sub
Lunar
reaction, like
Hyperbloom.
gonna add something because I fear that if they change reactions or at least some of them, that can really start to mess with some other characters that really rely on it, and that could upset some people. Like if they make Vaporize just work completely differently, how does that affect Mualani? How does that affect Hu Tao? Or I don't know. There's a lot that can go on that. You can take any reaction and see which characters really like that, and if would the change actually be good for them, or would it be bad for them? Because if it helps someone over here, it could hurt someone over here. Is that okay? I don't know. Maybe just a lot to think about with changing what's already in the game as far as some of the reactions, because that's Genshin's built on the reaction system. That's what makes it unique from all these
Looking
other
ahead a
games.
little bit to the Lunar Charge stuff, they are rewarding you less for having elemental application and rewarding you more for building other damage sources besides the reaction.
That is true. So
That is what it effectively does
it's
mechanically.
a step of evolution for the
They don't
gameplay mechanic. Yeah.
want you to have the characters built fully M. They want you to have some other stats. And they, because you're building those other stats, your other abilities are doing more damage. and the team is more, or the team is
feels
less
more
defined
organic.
by the reaction.
Yes, kind of like you were talking about with spread and aggravate being just a good function in the game, because you still care about things like crit, even attack a little bit, not as much as EM, but it's not like just your character level and full EM like Hyper Bloom is. So I can agree with that.
Do you think, speaking of lunar reactions, do you think that would be like the theme of potentially other lunar reactions, or like are they even going to introduce newer lunar reactions? Because like if we want to talk about new reactions, I don't think they're going to change the existing ones,
They
other
made a
than
new font.
potential they made yeah, that's true, they made a new font. It could be
They're gonna
based
roll it out
around
for
that.
all the elements.
They have, I mean, they're in IT, there's Rhymegrass. I mean, they could add that if they think that was successful. For if we want to talk Dendro reactions.
Like
There we go.
personally.
Force
Or
cryo
this one.
even more into
Oh,
it. Yeah, it's an interesting one, because what do you do now with, I guess, every single other reaction now? Does that mean that there's another lunar version of it? Is that what you now have to do? And now I guess my other question would be, is this lunar now going to be locked behind new units, and old
It
units
is.
can't be
Yes.
using
Yes.
it anymore? Right. So now now we go
originally
right back to
focused.
the initial idea of it being, you got to pull
Yeah,
every new
props.
thing because of all of these new reactions, or else now you can't. It used to be pay to win or whatever, or pay to clear the abyss faster, and now it's going to be pay to have a new reaction, which that's also interesting ground to come into as well.
This year they also introduced pay to get around faster.
Right, which is
Look, what do you have
also
to say
weird.
about that?
I think a part of it is why the Natlan characters are so good. They want you to. So a major focus in Natlan is how your characters move around the world. They want you to pull them for exploration, but you shouldn't just be pulling a character for exploration. They need to be useful in combat. So I think they intentionally overtuned some of the Natlan characters, so you would pull them for combat and still get the usage out of the overworld, and they just wanted you to use
Orisa?
Natlan characters, period. Is that maybe a conspiracy? Yeah, but that's mechanically.
I feel like Mavwika, maybe Versa, was the only two that were really overtuned. I think other things were just in line with the standard power creep I expected.
I would tell you every Natlan character besides Shaska is as good or better than Nivelette.
Kinech?
Yeah.
I think if you take, yeah, I think if you count damage, yes. If you're a person who heavily favors comfort, then
Then no.
I think
Yeah,
then
I'm a casual, so I'm like,
yeah.
when we look at Mulaney versus Nevi, I'm like Nevi.
Yeah, I just want to add one more point on the reaction standpoint, where like adding different reactions to be like as a buff for a character is pretty game changing if anyone can access it. So like for example, the addition of Dendro was actually, I would say, pretty successful. It didn't like break anything, right?
I would tell you they intentionally made the pyro reactions with Dendro bad.
Yeah, I guess that's the way of balancing, right?
That is how they balance it.
Yeah, burning.
They made burning
So
and broken.
if they like, I think if they are releasing lunar reactions for every single reaction, or for like most new reactions, that is kind of like their way of creating a new mechanic. For example, Natlan characters have their own Night Soul mechanic, and that's how they play differently. But then for potentially Nod-Krai, that will be the new mechanic of like, oh, how do you play the game differently? But you need to pull a specific character in order to enable that reaction.
I think Night Soul is really egregious because all it does is it enables gearing for the Natlan characters. And the Natlan characters have access to the best sets in the game, and it is only because they are Natlan characters. And that's the only conditional.
They're just gonna do that, but with the reaction.
Well,
I promise you that.
Scroll and Codex, specifically Scroll, is your support is literally better if they are from Natlan.
Yeah, they're just
Do
gonna.
you know how much
Yeah,
better
no wrong.
Escoffier would be if she was from Natlan?
Oh my goodness.
That's what I was fearful of. I'm not gonna lie. When I saw that, I was like, that's why, because I didn't initially see that she was a Fontanian. So before, when everyone was originally talking about her, I thought she was gonna be Natlan, which I was like, okay. But that's the other thing, is that the only way to cap that would be that the effect can't stack, but it's already so strong that you don't need it to stack.
Also, if you look at, I know this is kind of very off topic, but if you look at Escofia's kit, the reason why she has to be so overtuned is because she's not a Natlan character.
Yes, because she
Yeah, I
can't.
was
She
about
can't
to
get
say
access
that.
to the
Like,
scroll set.
Yes.
like, and then that begs the question, like, that means all future, potentially even DPSs, but like supports kind of have to be compared and balanced in a way where, okay, a Natlan support can give 4-piece scrolls. So in order for a support to be better, and Hoya wants to make better support so you get the pull for them, they need to give a lot of buffs in order to
Or
get them to be
they
good
just
if
make
they don't, if
every
they don't
support
scroll.
from Natlan.
Oh, true.
Yeah, true.
Just
There's
never
Give 'em all
still
Visa,
no, there's
give 'em
still
all
no
Visa.
Hydra character from Natlan besides Mualani. There's still time.
There's no Hydro Claymore either.
There's no Pyro character besides Mahuika.
I think they're just
Well,
gonna.
Wolfika being the only pyro is actually intentional.
Because of the
I'm pretty
Archon.
sure. Yeah, well,
Counter argument: Jabalanke.
If only.
yeah, that's true.
All I think in Nod-Krai is they're just gonna tune up over the Obsidian set, and then they're also gonna tune up the scroll set, and that's gonna be based off the new reaction. If you trigger one of them, you get the crit rate. If you trigger one of them, you get damage bonus. It's gonna be 50% damage bonus, 40% crit rate, 10% crit damage, 20% crit damage.
Is it gonna be?
That's all it's gonna be.
Is it gonna be? Because I remember, I mean, we had 36%, and that was stackable 12, 12, 12 with Merchase, and then you had, pairing that with Farina, or even characters in that time period were changing their own HP. But now Merchase can be used on anyone. That was a 36% crit rate increase. Then Codex came along. Now it's 40%. And now you have taken away the need of a character, like going back to a character like Al-Haytham, with you have to focus on crit, you have to focus on attack, you have to focus on EM, and you're trying to balance all of these plates. Whereas now you just have one of those like stats as almost like okay, I don't have to worry about that anymore because now I just have like a free given of so much XYZ help from an artifact set.
Merchase Hunter and Codex are so good for the community. You were talking about it earlier. People were delusional and would only ever build 70% crit rate and say, yeah, it's good enough. Because you don't pay attention to the numbers that don't crit.
We didn't have such big numbers that we didn't have 300% crit damage, right? So that's why it was.
Well, it's those characters are more difficult to build with high crit rate, and it felt actively bad building high crit rate because you were literally seeing your numbers increase because you only pay attention to the non-crit.
Right. You don't look at clear times and stuff like that.
By trivializing crit rate, or at least making it easier to cap, you don't feel like you're penalizing yourself.
Yeah.
I think those sets are actually very good for the game in that way, and the community.
Yeah, it's just
Right.
fun. Like, why? I don't want to have to deal with crit rate. No.
No.
I lose 5% on my
People
monthly
still
every
find a
single day.
way to play 30 crit rate Nufalat.
But I think
Because 60% is good enough.
I mean, especially now bringing in cryo teams. I mean, now you've got the extra 15% from there. Now you have, once again, we're talking about the extra stat increases of just getting more makes our lives easier. So, yeah, okay. I mean, that's a pretty interesting and good way to kind of say it because now you're now focusing on actually enjoying the character rather than sitting there and feeling like you're saying, you're focusing on your numbers kind of decrease. Especially with a character that's hitting super fast or whatever, you're not having to worry about all those changes, I guess.
Yeah, that's another thing. Our characters weren't doing like 4 hits per rotation.
Correct.
The other big difference between Codex and Merchase is Codex's 2-piece is on all of your damage. Merchase's 2-piece is only on normal attack and attack. This seems like a small difference, but it actually really matters. And it makes Codex significantly better for the characters that can use it. That's why you don't see people using Merchase on any character that can use Codex. Because it's not just a 4% crit rate.
Well, yeah, and I remember I was figuring this out a while ago. This is a little while ago, but people were even talking about 4-piece Merchase with C1 Skirk and how that switched over because of that crit rate increase is now helping that extra charge attack buff, whereas her personal set doesn't actually help that. So it's actually going also back to looking at how well Merchase can actually be helping her that C1 hit that Skirk has as well, because her personal set doesn't actually help that charge attack hit that C1 comes from. So it's almost it's idiosyncrasies with each kit that kind of change these sets and therefore change how the game kind of works.
Yeah, like Farazan, even pre C6, you would just do Viridescent, but once you hit C6, you're gonna do Tenacity for your Xiao, because she can actually proc that.
Hmm.
It's just another example of like what you're talking about.
Well, the Skirk thing is funny. It's primarily that 60 damage bonus is not good enough compared to 36 crit rate. You need a set to be as good as the Varessa set. You want sets to have 100 damage bonus from now on if they're only going to give damage bonus. That's like the primary thing.
They just kind of messed up with Skirk's set.
And even then, like Long Night's Oath and the Plunge aren't even that. Sorry, Long Night's Oath and Obsidian aren't even like that far behind.
No, they're not. It's like the ultimate example.
Yeah, they unironically could have just had 5.0 sets, Obsidian, Codex, and Scroll, and just didn't release a second set, and it literally wouldn't have done anything. Like these
Nothing
new
would have
sets they decide to release in Natlan don't really impact at all. The Scroll and Obsidian Codex are just that strong.
I do
Okay.
like the Skirk set for farming because you can just walk in and
Oof.
burst. It's kind of nice.
Fontaine didn't really do anything like that either, right? It was Whimsy, which is incredibly, stuck to one character, and then Revere.
I mean, at least it's good on those characters.
Reverie is a
Yeah.
set for no one.
I haven't
Oh, well,
kept up,
there,
I'll be
there's
honest.
also the Nighttime Whisper set alongside
Yeah, yeah. just
Song of
looking
Days
at that.
Past.
Nighttime Whispers in the Echo.
Song of Days
Woods.
Past actually did. It's actually somewhat good. It's a
Yeah,
best. is
Natlan
not
actually
good.
skipped like an artifact.
I think they
Yeah, like,
realized
we've
that they
only
kind
got
of
2 right now, and we're already at 5.7.
I mean,
So yeah.
We can talk about the
Mm.
sets from the end of Sumeru as well. Nymph's Dream and Vorukasha's Glow.
Yeah.
No clue why they
Vorukasha's
even
Glow
released
is a set that would be Yellow's best in slot if Farina's HP drain actually activated it,
No.
but it doesn't. They didn't think that far ahead. It could have been a good set.
if they only cared.
It was probably intentional, honestly.
I don't know about that.
I think so. No, I think they
It's
were
just
designing
that
it well.
Farina's self-damage and Dia's self-damage are not implemented the same way.
Yeah, and the second set is for some reason designed for child for some odd reason.
When he already had his
You
own
see,
set
look,
and
Genshin
Designed
going
it
back to buff older
correctly.
units.
Yeah, whenever
This
they
dream
acted-
doesn't have long enough stacks to be universally accepted as great on Tartaglia. If you compare Polar Star and Nymph's Dream, Polar Star has longer stack duration, which is why it's always good.
and we could
I
kind
don't
of
know what they were cooking.
Yeah, we could look at that and be like, that was their attempt at buffing older characters with artifact sets and weapons.
Yeah,
and,
they did.
like it wasn't good.
No, the
Yeah.
stream fell right on its face. That's why people still just used Heart Depth, but
Two piece.
Yeah, two-piece,
or just
two-piece.
two piece.
I guess here's the question. Would it feel, or here's a question. If they buff specifically one character, let's say they buff Ganyu, how would you feel if you play Ayaka? If Ayaka is completely untouched, but they buff Ganyu?
I just see it as I'll get my turn eventually.
But what if it never comes?
I was
It
about
will.
to say.
Dude, I'll be honest. Dokkan. All right, I haven't talked about Dokkan. They did 15 easy A's during their anniversary. That is 15 new entire kits basically they had to do from the ground up. They can design some extra, kits for Genshin. They only do one character or maybe 2 characters an update. They can do some more. That's all I gotta say. They could even do just basic buffs where it's like 400% attack. There you go. Take your buff.
I think with Genshin having so many characters, if they are going to actually change like a numerical value and just increase it, I think eventually a lot of characters will be left in the dust that you could argue that they need a buff. And I think like Jaystern said, it's hard to set a specific standard and like, oh, this character should get buffed because it's X% behind, right? And it's pretty much going to be on popularity. Like we can just see from Honkai Star, they pick Jingliu and then all Stellaron hunters, right? So, and then you could argue made her a complete support. Anyway, so
Okay.
characters will be left
you didn't have to
behind.
mention that.
Characters will inevitably be left behind. So it's if they are going to actually specifically buff a character,
Is it fair?
it's
Is, I
it's
guess,
not
my
going to be
question.
fair. And
More the problems that come
how they're
along
gonna
with
choose
it.
the character, how they're gonna choose the character who gets buff, it's kind of up to their discretion. Like I said, probably due to popularity. Now, whether or not they do this, I think we've discussed this a lot. We'll just have to see. But I do think that they're just going to continue on with releasing newer and newer stuff. It doesn't seem like any direct buffs will be on the way, like Constellations, whether it's Constellations based C0 buff. probably just going to be continued with newer characters, newer artifact sets, stronger characters that will benefit weaker characters. And while it is easier to do that, and it definitely helps a lot of characters, as we can see with Escoffier, I think the danger there is that, as we've mentioned already, if, like, for example, if we have more Escoffiers, more stronger supports, then it is like the team that I think also Jason said this, where the team, like the best teams, are kind of just locked. So you're just kicking out older supports.
Yeah, and I actually would agree with that. I think that Genshin's path, I think the path they just want to take, because there's no doubt they've thought about this in the studio before. I mean, their neighbor games are doing direct buffs to characters' kits and reworking kits, changing their scalings or whatever the case may be. With Genshin, I think in the trend's been, hey, we're gonna introduce this new character, kind of bring the, Chevreuse, Mika, you got your specific 4-stars that kind of help one particular character or something like that. Now we've got Escoffier, and I think that's just the trend they want to do. And I agree with you, Andad. I think they're just going to continue that and not directly give numerical buffs or change kits or something like that, unless it's a Zhongli incident or that one Nouvelle incident that happened and they changed the thing within 24 hours. That also happened. That's the only way they're going to change an actual kit. I think that's just the path they want to take.
Let's ignore everything we talked about. Pick one character to get a buff, and how do you buff them?
Okay. You want to go ahead and start us out? What's cooking in your brain?
Okay. So my favorite character is Hu Tao. I would want normal attack +3. Hu Tao also has this HP conversion cap to attack. If this cap actually decreases, as in, like, it becomes easier to hit with C3 currently. They do this because the conversion increases, but the cap doesn't move. If you were curious, 7.15, which is her birthday. The conversion is the same number. With C3, if you have Staphahoma, any HP above 40k is significantly diminished in its value. I'd like this to not be the case. It's kind of archaic. There's no real reason to have a cap on it. Characters from 1.0 like Noelle or even later Ito have similar stat conversions with no caps. Clean this up, please. What's the big deal?
Chlorant too. Like, Chlorant has, I think it's her C2, increases her cap. Sorry, increases the scaling, but also increases her cap as well. So she doesn't run into this issue.
Chlorant's cap is kind of still an issue.
I normally call her Chloride.
Is that who you'd pick, Flip? Would you
No,
buff
Chlorant is good.
Okay, then who would you
I was
buff?
gonna say, tell that to Jello.
And how would you buff
Who
them?
would I buff? Okay, it would either be Raiden or it would be Venti.
You're a
I can't think of buffs
You're
for
a
Venti.
traitor to Chlorant.
Chlorant doesn't need it. She's good enough. Raiden kind of. So Raiden or Venti. I think for Raiden, I can only think of things for Raiden. I can't think of things for Venti. I think Raiden kind of, instead of having her ER to damage bonus, I think it is currently, it should have been somewhere like ER to crit, because it makes it. She's a character that has a nuke. Her supposed pairing was supposed to be Sora. I just think it would make sense if they gave her crit rate for ER. It would make her a lot more consistent. It'd make her way easier to build, and also just increasing her scaling too. Maybe making her a better battery, because it is still kind of awkward even with at Caesar at least, or without engulfing lightning. I don't know. There's a few things you could do. Just making her a better battery and giving her crit in her base kit.
You stole my Raiden because I wanted the Raiden buff. But
Oh my bad.
no, that's okay. Well, there are some things I wanted to add. Raiden C1 is just like increased resolve stacks, right? But one of them is like for like increase for Electro characters specifically. I mean, they could just make a baseline so that everyone contributes. But also, Mawika also has fighting spirit generation, but how come her constellation also just gives her attack? Like, can we get a little bit more than that? And then on top of that, aside from numerical buffs, one of Raiden's like annoying things is that her coordinated attack just doesn't work against shields, and you just don't get energy or electro application, which is really annoying.
Right.
Like, they could definitely just fix that.
Too, by the way.
That would be an example of like a character feeling much better to play, and not necessarily a numerical buff. I think that would help the character a lot.
Well, Red Ward, do you have anything?
Yeah, I just figured out mine. It's Risley.
Ooh.
I love
really.
I love the dude, and I love like how his voice actor I'm not going to go into the whole thing, but man, like the dude, he's so cool. But then the man is like so bad. I have C3R1, so like he's not bad at all. I can get him to do 3 million damage in a rotation. It's like 1.2 million from F. We don't talk about that. But like I don't know how I would buff him. I think if I was looking at him from a, how I normally look at characters, I would give him a C1, but then he's left with Widzith. I hate Widzith, right? So I'd give him a better 4-star weapon. Maybe I wouldn't hate it as much if I didn't have to test with it, but
Floating purity exists if you want a
I
less
don't know.
annoying Widzith.
I'm not down bad for my C301. I'm good.
Fair
But
enough.
I think I would just give him. I really don't know what I would give him. I think I just give him more damage on his fists before he does his charge, probably.
Oh, something I didn't even
Actual
mention
normal
is
attack damage.
the way characters generate particles has changed. I'd like every character to get their particles up front, please.
Fury, I hate
If
Fury
you're,
so
if you're
much for
from
that.
Natlan, you instantly get 5.
Yeah.
Why Mona's particles happens after her it's so weird.
After her taunt pops.
She does her taunt. Yeah, after her
Right.
taunt pops, but she's off field by the time that happens. So her ER just breaks for no reason.
Yeah.
Even Ganyu does like 2 at the start when she casts her skill, and then 2 in a burst, which makes so much more.
I found it really funny how when Escafie beta was released, people were expecting 5 particles because that was the norm, and then just 4.
No.
Should have been from Natlan.
Risley. Anyway, TLDR, Risley should generate. I'd also like a cryo resonance buff for Risley.
Hmm?
So if you
Oh,
don't know how
from Mel-
cryo resonance works, it only
No,
buffs.
I know. That's why I like
cryo
Shenhe
resonance
and
on enemies.
yeah.
So
I like
if you play Shenhe in a melt team, cryo doesn't have a resonance because you're melting. You're not actually getting that 15 crit rate
Yeah, keeping
unless the pyro character is melting.
correct. Yeah, you're not able to keep the application on without actually making
Well,
sure
there
you're.
is no application.
Well,
There's
that's
no cryo aura.
yeah, exactly. So you can't actually even have anything on the enemy. Rift.
Buff, please.
Yeah.
It would also
yeah,
make
for me-
calculating so much easier, so people don't have 20 different results for skirt teams.
Oh yeah, tell me about it.
Yep.
For me, since no one had said it, I'm actually surprised no one brought it up because I know some of you agree with this because it was brought up. But Venti is going to be my pick, and what I would, it's a simple change I would do, because he can already, he has the crowd control. That's what people will bring up. He's like, well, he's got the crowd control, that he's still superior, and yes, that is true. So what I would like to see in Venti, and I'll just say it, what I would like to see in Venti is a lot of damage increase for his burst from off field, because what we really don't have solid, at least in the Animo roster in general, is a solid off-field damage dealer. The closest thing we have to things like that are going to be Kazuha, Sucrose, Lynette. The other off-fielders, Lanyan, Farza, they're not like heavy on damage, and even Lynette, Sucrose aren't dishing out a lot of damage. Kazuha has some, but it's only when you skill, and some of the burst hit, it's there. But if we could see like actual good damage numbers out of Venti from off field to put him on a level of like Chiori, Emily, I guess Escoffier now, like make him the premier Animo sub DPS from off field, and that's like his thing.
I was gonna say make him
That's
place
really
his
cool.
burst on the ground where his feet are.
I was gonna say, could you make
Yeah,
it
lower
lower?
it a little bit.
And I could have thrown a little
Uh,
side tangent in there, please. Just like they kind of nerfed him in. Maybe they did it on purpose. Maybe they didn't. He can't pull in bigger enemies, therefore making grouping larger enemies also a bit of an annoyance, and practically therefore making his grouping
It would be
effect
funny if he could, and
useless.
that's like part of the buff.
So if he could at least
He's the
pull
Animorph, he's
them, he
gotta
doesn't
be
have to
able to-
pull them in the air, but if we could just get a little bit of a, I don't know, just a little bit more of a
Well,
grouping aspect.
One of the reasons
He
Kazuha's
ca-
grouping
Venti
is so
can pull
useful
Okay.
is because it is where he's standing. You can perfectly aim Kazuha's targeting.
Mhm.
There's no guesswork involved, and there's no enemy spacing involved. This is
Yeah,
a
maybe that's
really
why I like
simple and
the damage
fundamental thing that would instantly make Venti feel better.
Yeah, remember the casual player thing? Venti and Ayaka. I can't. No, I can't, man. I ate him.
I think
missed the entire burst.
if I had to, I guess, buff a character, I mean, it's just one of my favorite characters. This is why. But we've talked about him as a character that has had other characters that have buffed him, and that would be Xiao. I think I would love to see Xiao actually be a strong character again. He's already been given everything he needs outside of his kit. Issues that I've seen with him as a personal fan of him that's, I mean, bled and died through his entire artifact, through changes, through perfecting everything about him. The issue comes in with Constellations. I mean, his Constellations, his first one just gives you an extra charge of his skill, which only becomes useful when you get to the C6. The C2 and the C4 feel like you're not getting really anything. And, you know, the skill upgrade in that other constellation is useless. And I feel like if we went back to what you were talking about, Jaystern, and adding maybe a, like you were talking about with like Zenless, how they add multiple levels to all the different talents, that would be helpful for him. And also with, I don't know, maybe just also when he's in his burst state, could we please allow him to get energy? Because when he's in his burst state and he can't get energy, it makes using him so much more difficult, because you have to rely on every other character running Fav, which is possibly a damage loss for those characters, or just a straight, you know, buff loss for Xiao and those other characters.
Just to nitpick a tiny bit, he does get energy, he just doesn't generate particles when he's still.
Well, yeah, that's what I meant. I mean, he can get energy from the other units, but I mean specifically like creating particles himself. Because then you're only banking on like...
You're forced to funnel.
Correct. You're forced, like I was saying, you're forced to kind of run Fav on other units. For instance, with Shanyun or something, you could possibly try to do that. Force her to run Fav instead of her personal weapon, which buffs plunge damage. So you're losing that buff, but you're getting your burst back, which is allowing for smoother rotations, which is technically helping damage faster, kind of. So that's what I would change if I was to kind of rework Xiao.
Farazan gives particles. Farazan C6 gives particles over time. That's part of the particles up front versus particles over time thing. You see this with characters like Gaming, where if you end the chamber mid-burst, you simply just
It's
cannot
over.
burst next chamber.
We should put that in the right and rework.
This is also a Raiden issue.
Yeah.
Both said the same
A lot
thing,
of
yeah.
these bursts.
This
Really
is also a
first one to
Shiloh. We
characters.
could that Shiloh issue.
Well,
Kind
go
of.
without Shilonen, yeah.
Yeah, that's why I don't like the Yansan is their best team.
I don't know exactly how you fix that though. It's
No.
kind of fundamental.
Unless they make every character have no energy now.
Yeah.
You could just make like multiple hits for Raiden, like on multiple enemies, you could just generate twice the amount of energy, maybe.
Just make her generate all the energy she needs to with her first slash. That would be nice.
And then all you have
Because
to worry about
sometimes you
is
do
the
have to
cooldown.
swap off early.
Have it
That
work
also
like
buffs
Genshin,
Raiden
where
as a
it's just
support.
refunds.
Yeah. She could actually be a quick swap unit.
True, actually, yeah.
There's a lot of different changes. Some interesting. I wasn't expecting.
There's so much you could do, yeah.
Yeah, especially with these characters. There's a lot of bursts. It feels like, especially that we've talked about, that need more help than most things. It looks like. Once again, just those older units that are worked back then, but now it seems with all the new units changes things.
Yeah, they've definitely thrown away the energy gimmick, I feel like, with the newer characters.
It's really frustrating because the new game mode starts you with 0 energy.
Yeah.
So the new
that's-
characters are automatically.
That's what I was thinking about too, actually, while y'all were
Oh, I wasn't
discussing
speaking about that. I was
Raiden.
speaking about even like
Yeah.
Kanich and Mulani. They don't have much like energy requirements.
Yeah.
If you're running Kanich with Emily, you know, she'll generate energy.
Well-
But the whole thing over time again.
Yeah, and I think
We-
that'll
we've
be
seen
kind of a
elements of
talking
skill
point with
Stance characters.
that
since-
game mode, and that's a different topic.
Well, I
but, like,
mean, both Mulani and Kanich want their elemental burst. I'm just saying it's nowhere near as hard to get as comparatively to like older characters.
Mm.
Because like Shangling, Xingqiu, you basically had to build those guys with their main stat being energy recharge.
Well, those characters are their burst.
Other
It's
characters are
very
burst.
ancillary for Kanich and Mulan.
Looking overall, I guess kind of just so for the audience to kind of grasp onto the idea, we've talked already about kind of, I guess, everything now, fully looking at everything, which was, you know, should Genshin even do the idea, which was brought up with a lot of other games, a lot of other ideas, talking about kind of what actually is brought up with those other units. Constellation we talked about kind of what goes on with each of those different units and kind of how that actually can help or hurt. And then we kind of jumped over into the next part, which was looking at, would you buff the Genshin, like old Genshin characters, if kind of each of the people here really walked into Hoyo headquarters and they were to listen to us? Would you actually, you know, will Genshin, if you could kind of be a fly on the wall, would they actually do it? And we've seen some of the past, what they've done. We've talked about it throughout the entire video, how that has changed, whether that be through certain reactions to buff older elements by bringing a new element in. We've talked about how new units have been brought in, how reactions now have been changing or adding sub-reactions to an extent with something like Lunar in the future, and how possibly what that could bring. We've also looked at, if they were going to change, units, who would it be? We've went from way back in the day characters with like Archons. We've talked about Yoimiya. We've talked about a lot of different things. So I guess now to just wrap everything up, the question then I guess comes to, now the audience. What do you guys think down below? You can just let us know in the comments. What do you guys think, about the different questions we've kind of gone over, everything we've talked about. I mean, even the initial questions we've brought up, we've talked a lot about different things. So let us know, I guess, more or less what you guys would hope for in specifically this type of content. Would you guys be wanting more of certain characters buffed? Would you guys want more reactions? Would you guys want them to just correctly maybe bring in new reactions? Or I don't know, what are you guys actually thinking as well? So let us know down in the comments what you guys are looking for.
But other than that, this has been a great talk, guys. So once again, thank you everyone for joining us on this. If you guys want, you can say bye to the viewers. And we had a lot of fun. This was a long talk, and it was so good to have you guys. Can't wait for what the future might have in
Thanks
store
for having
for
us.
future content.
I just said thanks for having us. Also, I waved.
Yes. Oh yeah.
You guys
'Cause
see
we
it, but I
did.
Yeah.
waved.
I can't react
we
with
will
a
wait
wave.
for
Where's
you.
the react wave?
Add it in the edit. Just get like an emoji wave.
Yeah.
All right.
Just slap something on
All
screen
right.
for you.
But yeah, thank you once
Thank
again,
you.
guys, for joining us, and thank you guys for watching.